If you're lying to me, Chioma, there's nowhere left to hide.
I'm not the one lying to you, sir. I'm not the one lying to you, sir. She is.
30 minutes. That's all I had to decide, whether to save a man who once saved me, or protect a woman who was about to destroy him. That single choice would change 5 lives before the sun went down that day. Hey, wherever you're watching this from, whether you've got headphones in on a lunch break, driving home from work, or curled up under a blanket right now, I want you to get comfortable, because this one is going to sit with you long after it ends. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from today, and how the weather's treating you, because where I'm about to take you, the sun was shining, and nobody in that house had any idea what was coming. There's a kind of justice that doesn't come from courts or contracts. It comes quietly. In a moment, somebody almost lets pass them by. This is a story about a woman who had every reason to look away and chose not to. Her name was Chioma. This is the story of how a maid, who wasn't supposed to matter to anyone in that house, ended up being the only person who could stop a wedding from becoming a massacre. Picture this: a woman in a housekeeper's uniform, standing frozen behind a cracked door, a phone pressed to her own ear that isn't even hers, listening to a bride 2 hours from her vows plan exactly how she was going to bleed her husband-to-be, dry and vanish before midnight. That was Chioma, 20 minutes before she had to decide who she was going to be. But let me start from the beginning. Chioma was 26 years old, and she had learned a long time ago that survival meant staying invisible. She wasn't born into money, and she wasn't chasing any either. What she wanted was simple: a paycheck that came on time, a room that locked from the inside, and nobody asking her too many questions about where she used to live before she came to work for the Kang household. She believed loyalty was something you paid back, not something you were owed. She believed that if someone pulled you out of the worst night of your life without asking for anything in return, you didn't forget that. Not ever. 3 years earlier, do-hyun Kang had done exactly that. Chioma never spoke about the details, not even to the other staff, but everyone in that house knew the shorthand version. She'd worked for someone dangerous before, someone who didn't let his people leave quietly, and Do-hyun had made sure she did. Since then, she folded his shirts, she managed his schedule, she kept his home running with a kind of quiet precision he never had to ask twice for. He wasn't warm with her, but he was fair, and in her world, fair was worth more than warm. What she didn't know, not yet, was that the woman he was marrying that afternoon had never once thought about being fair to anyone in her life. Priya Anand was beautiful, composed, and adored by every camera that had ever pointed at her. She laughed at the right moments, and cried at the right moments, and said all the right things about building a future with Do-hyun. The staff liked her, the guests loved her, and 2 floors below the dressing suite, where she sat getting her hair pinned into place, security detail from 3 different criminal networks were quietly comparing notes about how tight this alliance was about to make everyone's operation. Nobody was watching the maid pressing a gown flat with a steam iron in the corner of that room. Nobody ever did. Which is exactly why, when Priya's phone buzzed against the marble counter and she slipped into the connecting bathroom to take the call in private, she didn't think twice about leaving the door cracked open, just far enough for Chioma to hear every word. "Baby, relax," Priya was saying. Her voice dropped into something low and unrecognizable from the version everyone downstairs adored. "In 4 hours, I'll have a ring on my finger and full access to every account he thinks is hidden. By tonight, we disappear the transfers. By tomorrow, we disappear." Chioma's hand stopped moving. The iron hissed against silk she was no longer paying attention to, because in that one sentence, everything she thought she understood about the next 24 hours of her life had just come apart. Chioma didn't move for almost 10 full seconds. She just stood there with the iron hissing against a dress that wasn't hers, replaying the sentence in her head, trying to find a version of it that meant something other than what it obviously meant. She couldn't find one. 3 years ago, Chioma had been working for a man named Emeka Adeyemi, a mid-level enforcer who ran collections for a network that stretched from Lagos through 3 other cities before it ever touched the coast. She hadn't known what she was walking into when she took the job as his personal assistant. She thought it was administrative work, scheduling, paperwork, keeping his calendar straight. By the time she understood what Emeka actually did to the people who owed him money, she also understood that he didn't let people walk away once they'd seen too much. She'd tried anyway. It went badly. Do-hyun Kang had been in the city that week for a shipping negotiation that had nothing to do with her. What happened next was never something Chioma explained in detail, not to the staff, not to her own sister, not to anyone. All she ever said was that Do-hyun had been in the wrong room at the right time, and he'd made a decision that cost him more than money to make it disappear. Emeka never came looking for her again. Do-hyun never once brought it up afterward, never used it as leverage, never made her feel like she owed him her life in a way that came with strings attached. But she knew she did, and she'd spent 3 years paying it back in the only currency she had: quiet, consistent loyalty, the kind that didn't ask questions and didn't need thanks. Do-hyun wasn't an easy man to work for. He was precise to the point of coldness, the kind of person who noticed if a shirt was pressed a half-inch off from how he liked it, who expected silence in a room until he asked for something. But he was never cruel to her. He paid her well, gave her a private space in the east wing of the estate, and once, when her sister back home needed emergency surgery, he'd wired the money before Chioma even finished explaining the situation. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because that was simply what he did for the very small number of people he considered his. Priya Anand was not one of those people. Not really, though nobody in that house seemed to notice the difference. She'd come into Do-hyun's life 8 months earlier through a business dinner arranged by her father, a shipping magnate whose company handled freight routes Do-hyun's operation quietly depended on. The match made sense to everyone watching from the outside. 2 empires, one bloodline away from becoming one continuous supply chain, dressed up as a love story for the cameras and the guest list. Do-hyun had never been a man who believed in love stories, but something about Priya had gotten past whatever version of a guard he kept up with everyone else. Chioma had seen it happen slowly, in small moments. The way he'd let her rearrange his office without complaint. The way he'd started coming home earlier, when she was staying at the estate. The way his voice changed, just slightly, when he said her name on the phone. For a man who trusted almost no one, he had handed Priya something Chioma had never once seen him hand anyone else: the illusion that he didn't need to watch his back around her. Chioma had liked Priya too. In the ordinary way staff learn to like the people who are kind to them without being asked to be. Priya remembered her name. She asked about her day. She'd once sent a car to take Chioma to visit her sister without Do-hyun ever finding out, just because Chioma had mentioned missing her, which was exactly why the sentence coming through that cracked door didn't just feel like a betrayal of Do-hyun. It felt like one aimed at her too. "You're overthinking the timeline," Priya was saying now, her voice tightening with the particular impatience of someone repeating themselves. The transfers go through the moment the officiant pronounces us married. That's the window his systems flag joint account activity as routine, not suspicious. After that, we've got maybe 6 hours before his people start asking questions. That's more than enough. There was a pause. Whoever was on the other end of that call said something Chioma couldn't hear, and Priya's voice dropped even lower, almost tender, in a way that made Chioma's stomach turn. I know it's been a long 4 months, Raphael. I know, but you have to trust that I know exactly what I'm doing with this man. He thinks I love him. That's the whole point. Chioma set the iron down slowly, carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't trust them not to drop it. 4 months. Raphael, a timeline, a window in the security systems. This wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't a woman getting cold feet and reaching for comfort from an ex before a wedding she was nervous about. This was a plan, a long one, built with the same precision do-hyun used to run his own operation. Except this time, the operation was him. And somewhere in the last 8 months, while do-hyun had been quietly lowering the one guard he never lowered for anyone, Priya had been studying exactly where to find the opening. Chioma had exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes before the ceremony began. She thought about walking straight down to Do-hyun's private study right then, laying it all out, and letting him decide what to do with it. But some old instinct, the same one that had once told her to keep her head down around Emeka Adeyemi long after she should have run, told her that walking into that room with nothing but an overheard sentence wouldn't be enough. Do-hyun didn't move on suspicion, he moved on proof. And a woman who could lie this smoothly to a man who read liars for a living wasn't going to crumble under a maid's word alone. She needed something Priya couldn't talk her way out of. She needed to hear the rest of that call. Chioma pressed herself flat against the wall beside the bathroom door, the steamer still humming uselessly a few feet away, and listened as Priya's voice dropped into something even quieter. "No, listen to me," Priya said. "The moment I say I do, I become a joint signatory on 4 accounts he thinks are untouchable because his own lawyers set them up that way, for tax purposes, for optics, so it looks like a real marriage on paper to anyone who ever comes asking. He built the loophole himself. He just never imagined the wife walking through it would be the threat." A pause. Then, softer. "I know what you're worried about, but by the time he even notices the accounts are light, we'll already be past the point where his people can trace it fast enough to matter. He trusts me completely, Raphael." That's not an assumption. That's 4 months of very careful work. 4 months of very careful work. Chioma thought of every small kindness Priya had shown her since she'd arrived at the estate. The ride to see her sister, the way she always asked how Chioma's week had gone before launching into her own. She'd taken every one of those moments as evidence of a good person. Now she understood they were something else entirely. A woman who didn't waste effort on anyone who couldn't eventually be useful to her. Chioma had simply been another small, low-cost investment in a much larger performance. The call ended a few seconds later, and Chioma barely had time to step back toward the ironing board and pick the steamer back up before Priya walked out of the bathroom, adjusting an earring, her face arranged back into the soft, radiant calm of a woman about to marry into a fortune she loved, for exactly the reasons everyone assumed. "Everything okay in here?" Priya asked, glancing at Chioma with the easy warmth she always used with her. "Just finishing the hem, ma'am," Chioma said, and was surprised at how steady her own voice came out. "Should be ready in 10 minutes. You're a lifesaver," Priya said, and smiled, and for one disorienting second, Chioma almost believed she meant it. The moment the door closed behind Priya, heading toward hair and makeup, Chioma stood alone in the dressing suite, with her heart slamming against her ribs, and a single, impossible decision sitting in front of her, like a blade she had to either pick up or step away from. She could walk downstairs right now and tell Do-hyun everything, but she had nothing to show him except her own word against the word of the woman he was about to marry. A woman who had spent 4 months building a version of trust so convincing it had gotten past a man who didn't trust anyone. If she was wrong about how he'd react, if he needed more than an overheard sentence to act, Priya would have hours to cover her tracks, disappear the money anyway, and paint Chioma as a jealous, unstable member of staff trying to sabotage a wedding out of spite. Do-hyun's world did not forgive people who made accusations they couldn't prove. It barely forgave people who made accusations they could. Or she could say nothing at all, let the ceremony happen exactly as planned, and watch a man who had once saved her life, without asking for anything in return, walk directly into a plan 4 months in the making, one designed by someone who had learned exactly how to disappear the moment the vows were spoken. Neither option felt survivable. There was a third option, one that terrified her more than the other two combined, because it meant she couldn't just report the danger. She had to prove it, quietly, on her own, in the time it took hair and makeup to finish, and the guests to take their seats. It meant walking back into that suite, finding Priya's phone, and getting something Do-hyun couldn't argue his way around. It meant becoming, for the next 90 minutes, exactly the kind of person she had spent 3 years training herself never to be again. Someone who went looking for other people's secrets. Chioma set the steamer down, smoothed the front of her uniform with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and walked toward the vanity where Priya had left her phone charging beside a half-empty glass of champagne. The screen was locked. Of course it was, but taped to the underside of the vanity drawer, where Priya kept a spare hairpin holder. Chioma had seen something 3 weeks earlier, during a routine cleaning, that she hadn't thought twice about at the time. A small slip of paper with a 4-digit number scrawled on it, tucked beneath a jewelry tray, the kind of thing a woman writes down when she's worried about forgetting a passcode she doesn't use often enough to remember by instinct. Chioma had assumed it was a safe combination. She was about to find out if she was right. The drawer stuck slightly when Chioma pulled it open, and for one terrible second, she thought the sound would carry down the hallway to wherever the hairstylist and 2 bridesmaids were gathered. She held perfectly still, counting her own heartbeat, the way she used to count seconds in Emeka's office when she was waiting to see if a door was about to open. Nothing, just the distant murmur of a string quartet warming up somewhere on the lawn below. She found the slip of paper exactly where she remembered it, tucked beneath the jewelry tray, the ink slightly faded, 4 digits. She lifted Priya's phone from its charging cable, typed them in with fingers that felt clumsy and too large, and watched the screen unlock on the first try. For a moment, she almost lost her nerve entirely. This was the point of no return. Reading a private conversation overheard through a door was one thing. She could tell herself she hadn't gone looking for it. This was different. This was choosing to become someone who dug through another person's phone on her wedding day. And if she was caught, there would be no version of events where she came out of that room employed, let alone safe. She opened the Messages app anyway. The thread with Raphael went back further than 4 months. It went back almost a year, long before Priya had ever been introduced to Do-hyun at that business dinner her father arranged. Chioma scrolled, and the story assembled itself in fragments, each one worse than the last. Rafael Duarte wasn't an ex-boyfriend Priya had fallen back on out of nerves. He was a financial consultant who specialized, according to one message near the top of the thread, in asset repositioning for clients who need a clean exit. Priya's father hadn't arranged the dinner with Do-hyun by accident either. One message from 11 months back read, "My father thinks this alliance saves the company. It does the opposite. Anand Freight is 6 months from insolvency, and he doesn't know I know it." Another, a few weeks later, "If I can get access to Kang's liquidity before anyone finds out we're underwater, we don't just survive, we come out ahead of everyone who ever doubted this family." It wasn't a love story gone wrong. It wasn't even simple greed. Priya was trying to save her father's collapsing company by quietly bleeding a far more dangerous one. And she'd chosen the one man in her orbit who would never see it coming, because he'd built his entire life around being the person nobody could outmaneuver. Chioma kept scrolling and found the message that made her stomach drop entirely. "What about the maid?" Raphael had written. 3 days ago. "You said she overheard you on the phone last month. The one that mentioned the account restructuring. She didn't understand what she heard," Priya had replied. "She's loyal to Do-hyun, but she's not smart enough to piece together something like this. If she becomes a problem later, that's easily handled. People like her disappear from households like this one all the time. Nobody asks where staff go." Chioma read the sentence twice, then a third time, waiting for it to mean something different. It didn't. She wasn't just a bystander to this plan. She was a loose end Priya had already identified and already decided how to deal with, if it ever came to that. The kindness, the rides to see her sister, the warm smile 10 minutes ago, all of it had been calculated with the same cold precision as everything else in that thread, including the contingency plan for what happened to a maid who saw too much. Somewhere below, the quartet shifted into a different piece, and Chioma realized with a jolt that meant the guests were being seated. She had maybe 30 minutes left before the ceremony began. She could take a photo of the screen right now and walk it straight to Do-hyun. But a single photo, out of context, could still be argued away by a woman skilled enough to survive a year of deceiving a man who trusted almost no one. She needed the whole thread, time-stamped, undeniable, something Do-hyun's own people could verify in minutes, rather than argue about for hours. While Priya's window to disappear, the money stayed open. Chioma's hands were shaking again as she opened the settings, found the option to forward the entire conversation, and sent it to her own number, message by message, praying the phone didn't chime loud enough for anyone in the hallway to hear. She had just hit send on the last message when the door handle turned. Chioma barely had time to set the phone back down on its charging cable before the door swung open, and one of the bridesmaids, a younger cousin of Priya's named Isabel, stepped in already mid-sentence. "Priya wants her second earrings, the ones from the safe, not the—" Isabel stopped, glancing at Chioma standing near the vanity. "Oh, sorry. Have you seen her jewelry case? Right here," Chioma said, and was distantly amazed at how normal her own voice sounded, how her hands reached for the case on the dresser, without hesitation, as though she hadn't just spent the last 4 minutes photographing evidence of a plot to destroy the man who paid her salary. Isabel took the case, thanked her, and left without a second look. Chioma exhaled and realized her legs had gone unsteady beneath her. She had the proof now. What she didn't have was a plan for what to do with it, and the quartet outside had just shifted into the processional warm-up. which meant she had perhaps 20 minutes before Priya walked down that aisle. She thought about Do-hyun's lieutenants, the men who guarded the property and would recognize urgency in her face immediately if she went looking for one of them instead of him directly. But those men answered to Do-hyun, not to her, and if she brought this to the wrong person first, there was no guarantee it reached him in time, or reached him at all, in a form he'd believe. She had to go to him herself. Chioma found him in the estate's private study, exactly where she expected, standing at the window in a dark suit, phone in hand, finishing a call with the calm, clipped authority he used for everything in his life except, apparently, the one relationship that mattered enough to blind him. "Sir," she said, and the word came out smaller than she intended. "I need 5 minutes. It's about Priya." Do-hyun didn't turn immediately. When he did, something in her voice must have registered, because his expression sharpened into the same stillness she'd only seen a handful of times, usually right before he made a decision that ended badly for someone else. "Say it," she told him. She didn't soften it, didn't build up to it the way she might have with anyone else, because she understood instinctively that a man like Do-hyun had no patience for a story told sideways. She told him about the cracked door, about the 4-digit code, about Rafael Duarte and the year-long thread, about Anand Freight's insolvency, about the window in his own account systems that Priya had identified and planned to walk through the moment the officiant pronounced them married. And then, because she owed him the whole truth, even the part that endangered her most, she told him about the message where Priya had discussed what to do about the maid, if the maid ever became a problem. Do-hyun's face didn't change through any of it, which frightened her more than if he'd shouted. He simply held out his hand. The messages now. Chioma unlocked her own phone and handed it over. She watched him scroll, his thumb moving with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, his expression giving away nothing until he reached the message about her, the one that ended with people like her disappear from households like this one all the time. Something flickered there, brief and cold, gone as quickly as it appeared. "How long have you known?" he asked, not looking up. 12 minutes, Chioma said. "Maybe less." He handed the phone back and was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Chioma became aware of the quartet's music, swelling faintly through the walls. The sound of 150 guests being seated for a wedding that was supposed to begin in 18 minutes. "She's been planning this for a year," Do-hyun said finally, more to himself than to her. "Not 4 months. A year. Yes, sir. And she thought I'd never find out. She thought I wasn't smart enough to understand what I heard," Chioma said. She was wrong about that too. Something passed over Do-hyun's face that might have been the closest thing to gratitude Chioma had ever seen from him, gone almost as fast as it arrived, replaced by something far more dangerous settling into his eyes. "You could have said nothing," he said quietly. "It would have been safer for you." "I know," Chioma said. "But I decided I didn't want to be the kind of person who stayed safe by staying silent." Do-hyun studied her for a moment longer, then walked past her toward the door, already pulling his phone back out, already dialing someone whose voice on the other end sounded immediately alert, despite the early hour. "Clear the South accounts," he said into the phone, his voice flat and final. "All of them, in the next 10 minutes, and get me everything Anand Freight owes, across every ledger we can reach. I want it before the ceremony starts." He ended the call and turned back to Chioma, and for the first time that morning, something like a plan settled behind his eyes. "The wedding is still happening," he said. "Exactly on schedule. She doesn't get to know we've found her out until she's standing in front of everyone she was counting on to watch her win." The next 15 minutes moved with a strange, suspended calm that felt worse than panic would have. Do-hyun didn't raise his voice, didn't summon a room full of armed men, didn't do any of the things Chioma had half expected from a man capable of what she knew he was capable of. Instead, he moved through the estate with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, making calls, sending short-clipped messages, rearranging pieces on a board only he could see, while downstairs, the guests settled into their seats, and the string quartet drifted into something soft and ceremonial, entirely unaware that the marriage they'd gathered to witness had already come apart behind the scenes. Chioma stood just inside the study, unsure whether she was meant to leave or stay, feeling the full weight of what she'd started begin to settle over her. She had expected relief once the truth was out. Instead, what she felt was closer to dread, because now she understood there was no version of the next hour that ended quietly. A man like Do-hyun did not simply cancel a wedding and let the woman who'd spent a year plotting against him walk away to try again with someone else. "Sir," she said carefully, "what happens to her?" Do-hyun didn't look up from his phone. "That depends on what she does in the next 30 minutes. And Raphael, already being found." He said it the way another man might mention a delivery arriving on schedule. Chioma felt something cold settle in her chest, the same instinct that had once told her to run from Emeka Adeyemi's office, years before she understood exactly what he was capable of. She had brought this to Do-hyun because it was the only way to save him, and she still believed that had been the right choice. But watching him now, calm and methodical, and utterly without hesitation, she understood for the first time just how thin the line was between the man who had saved her life once and the man everyone else in his world had every reason to fear. "There's something else," Do-hyun said, finally looking up. "The message about what happens to you if you become a problem." Chioma said nothing. "You understand what that means," he said. "It means she already had people in place who would have made you disappear the moment she decided you were inconvenient. Not eventually, immediately, if she needed it. I understand. Then you understand why I need you to do one more thing before this ends, and why saying no is not a failure on your part if you can't." Chioma's pulse climbed. "What do you need?" "I need her to hear it from you," Do-hyun said. "Not from me. Not from my lawyers. Not from a phone call from her father telling her the company's finances have already been seized. I need her standing in front of every person who came to watch her win today, and I need her to understand that the person who saw through her was the one person she was certain didn't matter enough to notice." Chioma felt her stomach drop entirely. "You want me at the ceremony. I want you at the altar," Do-hyun said. "When it happens, I'll tell you when." Downstairs, the doors to the ceremony lawn opened, and the first notes of the processional began to drift up through the open windows of the study, soft and triumphant, and entirely oblivious to what was about to walk into it. Chioma thought of everything she stood to lose if this went wrong. Her job, her safety, possibly far more than that, if Priya or the people around her reacted the way desperate, cornered people sometimes did. She thought of the 12 minutes that had already reshaped her entire life, and the fact that there was no version of the next hour where she quietly disappeared back into the role she'd spent 3 years perfecting. She thought of the message Priya had written about her, so easily, so certain it would never matter. "I'll be there," Chioma said. Do-hyun nodded once, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door, leading out to the ceremony, leaving Chioma alone in the study for one final moment with the weight of what she'd just agreed to. Somewhere below, Priya Anand was stepping onto the aisle in white, believing she had 30 minutes left before she disappeared with everything Do-hyun Kang had ever built. She had considerably less than that. The silence that followed was the kind that seems to press against the ears. 150 guests holding still, waiting to understand what they were watching. Priya's father rose halfway from his seat in the front row, his face already shifting from confusion toward alarm. Eleonora, one of the few relatives of Do-hyun's who had made the trip, went rigid in her chair, sensing before anyone explained a word that something had gone catastrophically wrong with an alliance she'd spent months celebrating. "This is absurd," Priya said, recovering quickly, her voice pitched for the crowd now, wounded and incredulous in equal measure. "She's staff. Do-hyun, whatever this is, we can deal with it after the—"
"Let her speak,"
Do-hyun said. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The two words landed with enough weight that Priya's mouth closed, her eyes flicking toward him with the first flash of real fear Chioma had seen from her all morning. Chioma pulled her phone from the small clutch she'd been given and held it up, her hands finally steady. 4 months ago, I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. This morning I confirmed it. Every message on this phone is a copy of a conversation between Priya Anand and a man named Rafael Duarte, dating back nearly a year, discussing exactly how she planned to use this wedding to access Mr. Kang's accounts and disappear, with enough of them to save her father's company from insolvency. "That's a fabrication," Priya said, but her voice had lost its footing entirely, thin and brittle, in a way that made several guests exchange uneasy glances. "It's a screenshot of your own messages," Chioma said, "time-stamped, including the one where you discussed what to do about me, specifically, if I ever became a problem for your plan." A ripple moved through the crowd, the low murmur of 150 people simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they understood about the woman in white standing at the altar. Do-hyun stepped forward then, and when he spoke, it was not to Priya, but to the assembled guests, his voice carrying the same flat, commanding authority Chioma had heard him use on the phone in his study an hour earlier. "Anand Freight has been insolvent for 6 months, he said. Priya's father knew and chose to conceal it from every partner and investor tied to his company, including me. Priya knew as well, and rather than disclose it, she and Mr. Duarte constructed a plan to access my accounts the moment this marriage was legally binding, using a loophole in my own financial structure that she spent close to a year identifying. He paused, letting the words settle over the lawn before continuing. As of 11 minutes ago, every account she intended to access has been restructured beyond her reach. As of 9 minutes ago, Mr. Duarte was located and is currently being detained for questioning regarding financial fraud that extends considerably beyond this wedding. And as of this moment, Anand Freight's outstanding debts to my company and to several partners I've spoken with this morning are being called in immediately, in full. Priya's father made a strangled sound and sat back down heavily in his chair, the color draining from his face as he understood, in real time, exactly how completely his daughter's plan had unraveled and what it was about to cost him personally. Priya turned to Do-hyun, her carefully composed grief finally cracking into something raw and desperate. "You don't understand what you're doing. My father's company, the people who work for him, This will destroy. You should have thought of that before you decided destroying me was worth the risk, Do-hyun said, and there was nothing warm left in his voice at all. None of the tenderness. Chioma had watched him direct at this woman for 8 months. You didn't marry me. You were never going to marry me. You were executing a plan, and the only miscalculation in an otherwise thorough year of work was assuming the maid standing in the corner of every room wasn't paying attention. He turned then and looked directly at Chioma, in front of every guest, every business partner, every dangerous, watchful person gathered on that lawn. She heard something that should have meant nothing to her, he said, and instead of staying silent, the way anyone in her position would have been forgiven for doing, she brought it to me, knowing exactly what it would cost her if she was wrong, and knowing exactly what this family had already discussed doing to her if she became inconvenient. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, and then he said the words that would follow Chioma for the rest of her life, spoken in front of 150 witnesses who would never forget them either. I owe this woman more than I have ever owed anyone in my life, and I intend to spend the rest of it making certain she never has reason to regret what she did here today. Act 9. Satisfying resolution and future hook. The estate emptied within the hour. Security escorted Priya and her father off the property, under the watchful, uneasy gaze of guests who had arrived expecting champagne toasts, and left instead, having witnessed the quiet, methodical unraveling of an empire. Rafael Duarte's detention became, within weeks, the centerpiece of a fraud investigation that stretched across 3 financial jurisdictions, dragging Anand Freight's collapsed accounts into public record and ending whatever remained of the family name Priya's father had spent 30 years building. Priya herself disappeared from the social circles that had once adored her, the same way people in Do-hyun's world tended to disappear when they stopped being useful to anyone, though what became of her precisely was something Chioma never asked about, and Do-hyun never volunteered. For Chioma, the weeks that followed felt like stepping into a life she hadn't planned for, and wasn't entirely sure she was ready to inhabit. Do-hyun made good on what he'd said in front of every guest that day. He didn't simply reward her loyalty with a bonus and send her back to steaming gowns and managing schedules. He offered her something she'd never once imagined asking for, a position overseeing his household's operations with full authority, a salary that meant her sister would never again face a medical bill she couldn't cover, and something rarer still, his genuine trust, extended without the careful, guarded distance he kept with almost everyone else in his life. It wasn't romance, not in the beginning, and Chioma was careful not to mistake gratitude for something it wasn't. But over the months that followed, in the quiet, ordinary moments neither of them had time for during the chaos of that wedding day, something did begin to shift between them, slow and deliberate, built on the one thing Priya had never actually offered him, the truth, plainly spoken, even when it was dangerous to speak it. Chioma's sister recovered fully and came to visit the estate for the first time that spring, marveling at a life her sister had built for herself in a world she barely understood. Do-hyun's business interests, freed from the quiet sabotage that had been years in the making, grew stronger and more secure than they had been in a decade. And Chioma, who had once believed that survival meant staying invisible, learned instead that the moments that mattered most were the ones where she chose to be seen, even when it cost her everything to do it. She still thought sometimes about the version of that morning where she'd said nothing, where she'd let the ceremony proceed and told herself it wasn't her business what happened after. She understood now that version of herself would have survived too, technically, but she would have spent the rest of her life wondering what she'd let walk past her out of fear. She was glad, every single day since, that she hadn't. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments how you're doing today and where you're watching from. If Chioma's choice moved you, share this with someone who needs a reminder that courage doesn't always look like a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just refusing to stay silent when silence would have been so much easier. Like this video, subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next story.